I am excited for this one, guys. This is the new BLAZAR Apex 35mm autofocusing anamorphic at T1.8, and we're going to be testing this out and probably going to have a really fun time. Nice. Alright, so today we have the 35mm autofocusing anamorphic from BLAZAR here, and we're going to talk about the build quality of this, the glass inside, and some of my initial thoughts about the actual lens. So let's get into it. Now, I wanted to let you guys know that I actually bought these lenses, so I don't always get lenses sent to me. And because autofocusing anamorphic is so new, I really wanted to test out all that there is currently. And what's really funny is that I ordered this right before NAB, and it arrived one day before I left. So that means I was able to take this out and actually test it out there for you on some really extensive shoots. And let me tell you, we really put this through the ringer. Now, first up, in terms of build quality, the 35mm here is identical to the 50mm. They had pretty much the same size and weight as well as build quality with an all metal casing wrapped around it. You also have this orange accent on the end here to kind of signify where your aperture is, as well as the apex line itself. Now, as we all know, BLAZAR does not skimp out in terms of quality, and this thing is solid, and you have a really nice rotating ring here for your focus, as well as an included gear ring for those that want to still manually focus. Now, the lens itself has an 80mm front diameter, but it does have a 77mm thread, so it's identical for the 50mm, and everything can be swapped on exactly how it is. And on top of that, you do have a 16 blade iris, meaning you're going to get some really clean looking backgrounds, especially with an aperture of T1.8. And at 35mm, you're going to be getting some really unique shots. I always say that about a 35mm, but I think I'm a little bit biased in the fact that 35 is my favorite go-to lens. Now, the only slight difference is the fact that while it is the same size, the glass inside is a little bit heavier, coming in at around 723 grams, which is around a 5 to 6 gram difference from the 50mm. But for those that do balance this on a gimbal, they're pretty much cross compatible. Now, in terms of mounts, this is a Sony E-mount, and it's probably the only mount it's going to come in for a little bit, unfortunately, but I guess that's good for us Sony users. And again, because it is a prime lens, the only ring you'll have is the focus ring here, which is very smooth and easy to pull. With a 180-degree focus diameter and hard stops on either end, it'll be easy to pull focus manually as well, even if you aren't using a follow focus system. And in terms of initial quality, there was no dust, quality control was great, and BLAZAR really does pride themselves on a very clean looking lens that comes great straight out of the package. You do have a USB-C port here for any updates that this lens may get, but from my initial thoughts, this has been a very solid lens so far. Now, one of the things I really like about the Apex series here is the fact that they're so compact and easy to use when you need to travel and need an anamorphic. Rigging it up, I don't actually need a whole rod system because of the internal autofocus inside, and it does utilize the focus by wire system by BLAZAR, meaning you're able to switch between your manual focus and autofocus a lot easier. Now, getting into the glass itself, again, very impressive coming from BLAZAR here. They've kept a very consistent theme along the Apex line, which means both lenses are actually quite similar to each other, which is what you want coming from a set. Now, you are getting a very clean look from the Apex lenses, but you also have that slight tone of a vintage lens. And while it is a 1.33 times crop, at 35mm, it kind of seemed like I was getting a lot more from it. Now, I did have a chance to shoot this in a gym setting here, all thanks to Kofi. Shout out to Kofi for inviting me out. And I really got to test this in a lot of fast-paced environments, which also meant there was a lot of space to work with. Skin tones looked amazing on the lens itself, and the highlights in your skin had a softened look, which was great to see, especially in a gym setting where all you have is just sweat glistening everywhere and a bunch of like sunlight coming through. But to be able to actually see those tones exaggerated a bit more because of that vintage feel just made this lens seem like it had a lot more character. Now, it's actually quite sharp towards the middle of the frame, but as you can tell, on the edges, because it is an anamorphic lens, you were getting a little bit of a barrel distortion, which I happily invited. And because it is at a 35mm focal length, it actually helped draw the focus a little bit more towards the center, and it really helps frame your subject a little bit more. And again, there was very minimal chromatic aberration. I wouldn't say there was none at all, but I think that's what really helps add to the lens itself. Now, if we take a look at some of the examples that I have here, we're getting some very usable shots despite my levels being on the darker end here. We're seeing a lot lot of contrast in shadows between your darks and lights, and everything wasn't completely blown out. So while it does have a very vintage tone to it, you are able to get that very modern look in terms of clarity. Now on the 35mm, it's where the anamorphic flares really start to shine. Because of that wider field of view, you're getting a higher chance of actually catching more flares within the lens. And this one was very much prominent even with a mist on. And I like to test these lenses with the mist on and off just to see how strong those flares actually work throughout. I'd say on the Sure set, they were somewhat visible, but on the 35mm, you could see it as plain as day. So again, adding to that very cinematic tone. And because this is a neutral flare, you're all right on either the warmer or cooler tones. But let me tell you, when I saw these flares coming through, beautiful. It's actually one of the reasons why I really like these shots coming from this lens, especially because the blacks weren't completely crushed. Now, I don't like to crush my blacks too much in post, but even so, the flares were quite prominent throughout the entire image. So anytime it did show up throughout the screen and there was any shadows, it just kind of contrasted really nicely, especially with the light being used. Now let's talk about what we really came here about these lenses. The autofocusing capability in the Apex 35. And it's honestly way better than any of the anamorphic lenses I've previously tested. Now, Sure has the 40mm and 20mm, which have been great to use, very clean and very surgical, and I find their autofocus quite snappy and responsive. However, while this is also quite responsive, it wasn't as snappy. Now, that's not a bad thing because I did want a more smoother transition between subjects and focus points, and this definitely brought its A game. Because compared to the previous 50mm, the autofocusing on this lens is a ton faster, a lot smoother to control, and it actually responded faster on the FX30. Mind you, I didn't change many settings, and I know in the previous video for the 50mm, I had to tweak it a bit just to get it on par. But for the 35mm, for whatever reason, it worked a lot better, especially in low light. And because there was a ton of shadow casting throughout the gym, there was at some points that I thought that the lens might struggle just because of how much I wasn't able to see. But because of that lower aperture, I just cranked it all the way, and you can instantly tell that it was starting to recognize the subject a lot quicker, a lot faster. And even with eye autofocus turned on, it was reacting quite well. So I'd say I could instantly tell that there was a significant difference in terms of speed and quickness between the 50 and the 35, which I am glad that they fixed. Anyways, that was great on their end. Overall, this lens has been a great lens to use. And I'd almost say that this is a lens that I keep in my bag consistently. Unfortunately, it is anamorphic, so I can't use it for every project, but the 35 Apex is very usable. I think if you're going to bring an autofocusing anamorphic around for your Super 35 lenses, this is probably one of the top contenders for me in terms of all the lenses I've tested and the ones that are currently released. But there are a few things that I'd like to say about this. Now, as some of you may know, the Sure 40mm is still compatible with a full frame sensor, whereas these from BLAZAR are definitely not. You're going to, and I will guarantee you, get a lot of vignetting on the edges, especially because the lens actually can't go that far. Now, that's not a huge con because this is advertised for a Super 35 sensor, and that's probably why it's so much smaller in terms of size. But it was actually nice to be able to swap onto a full frame without cropping in too much. Something else I'd also like to note is that for a 35mm, I kind of wish that it had a more minimal focal distance. Unfortunately, for the 35 Apex, it was about half a meter away, which is a little bit a lot. I don't know. But I would definitely like to get a little bit closer with my subjects. Here, we could test it out right now and show you. I have the FX30 here to show. Turning it on, autofocus set to on, there you go. So yeah, I'm maybe getting about this much away from the lens. If I had a ruler, I'd definitely show you, but right now we're just gonna gauge it by this. But overall, not a huge bummer, but this would have been nice to be able to focus a little bit closer. Now, what I really do like about this lens though, is the fact that the actual lens doesn't get in the way of my fingers here. I have an adequate amount of space here that allows me to grip my camera properly without it actually running into the aperture ring. But getting into the aperture ring, it's still not controllable through your camera. Now, it's kind of funky that they did it this way because your only way of actually changing your aperture is on the ring itself, and while it does recognize the data being changed, you still can't change it with any of the dials on your actual lens. So they made the data readable, but you actually still can't change it regardless. Kind of weird, but I guess that's fine. At the end of the day, I Definitely recommend the 35 above the 50. A little bit of bias, but not really, just because if you want a little bit more functionality out of a lens, a 35mm anamorphic lens might just be a better bet for you. On top of that, at such a low aperture, great in low light. And I won't lie, running just this as a camera setup is a lot easier than carrying an entire rig. I mean, as it should. But getting the same capabilities out of these lenses is just mind-blowing to me nowadays. Anyways, if you like that video, go ahead and like it down below. And if you'd like, maybe subscribe. I don't really care. But if you want to, you should. All right, anyways. Oh yeah, I kind of noticed that all my videos have been on lenses so far, which not a bad thing. I like actually reviewing lenses and it's really fun for me. But if you want to see anything else, please comment down below and tell me what you want to see, because I want to help you guys as much as I can and probably learn a few things along the way. All right, anyways, I got some Burger King sitting downstairs and I'm very eager to eat it. So I will see you.